Debra Morgan's love for Dexter wasn't just a secret, it was an open truth, hiding in plain sight. While some might have noticed, few dared to confront it. Dr. Michelle Ross, the first person who listened to Debra's confession about his feelings for Dexter, was her therapist, Dr. Michelle Ross. Debra Morgan's confession to Dr. Ross was a turning point. After witnessing Dexter kill Travis Marshall, the world of Debra collapsed. Not only was I dealing with the trauma of the murder, but he had to face feelings for Dexter, whom he had buried for years. Therapy wasn't Debra's choice. She thrived on action, not reflection. But under Dr. Ross's questions, he admitted, "I think I love him, not as a brother." This moment was not only about his feelings, but exposed the complexity of Debra's identity. A hard detective with a strict moral code, who now faces an emotion that challenged everything she believed. Dr. Ross's question, "Where do you think comes from?" pushed Debra, and we look more deeply. Was your love for Dexter romantic, or was he rooted in his childhood? When he grew up, he saw Harry focus on Dexter as he fought to prove his worth. Dexter was the only constant in his life, someone who never left his side. Was it his love for him, or to hold on to the stability he represented? The failed relationships of Debra, Quinn, Lundy, and others seem to point to Dexter. Was it unconsciously compared with your brother's impossible standard, sabotaged in the process? Dr. Ross may have noticed this, but did the therapy help Debra, or pushed it deeper in confusion? By validating his feelings, did Dr. Ross inadvertently amplify his identity crisis? This was not just a confession, it was a point of rupture. Debra's feelings were not just about Dexter, they reflected their trauma, the need for connection, and their struggle to reconcile with who she was with whom she wanted to be. Now, let's go to Dexter himself. Dexter built his life in observing people. However, he did not see Debra's love, or did he? That is the question. Looking back, the signals were clear. The loyalty of Dexter was not just love between brothers, it was devotion. She prioritized him, risked her career, and even endangered her safety to protect him. Dexter, the observer teacher, never seemed to realize. Or was he choosing to look the other way? Dexter prospered in control about his impulses, his life, and his relationships. But Debra's love was out of control. He did not fit in his world of rules and limits. The control is not just about order, but it is about avoiding uncomfortable truths. When Debra confessed, Dexter's response was simple: "You are my sister." But was that his true answer? Or was it a reflection, closing a conversation that could not face? Recognizing his love, he would have unraveling everything Dexter worked to build. It would have meant admitting that it was not just a monster, but a human being capable of love and pain. And maybe that was the only thing I couldn't face. What would happen if Dexter's rejection was not about denying her, but protecting her? His relationships with women, Rita, Lila, Hannah, were defined by darkness. He knew the cost of letting someone enter their world. Could you reject your last act of love? Or maybe it wasn't it at all. Perhaps accepting his love would have forced him to face the man who was trying to repress. The man capable of love, not just a murderer. This is where it is complicated. By rejecting Debra, Dexter reflected Harry's favoritism. Growing, Dexter was Harry's approach. Debra stayed to find his own path. Could Dexter's cold response have reinforced the dynamics that made Debra feel the second best? The real question was Dexter's rejection about protecting Debra or protecting himself. If the person who knew him better could love him, what did that say about him? Could it really be the monster without emotions that I thought was? Dr. Evelyn Vogel. It was known to understand the darkest minds. But how could the prohibited love of Debra by Dexter be missing? Or did he see and choose to ignore him? Vogel, the mother of psychopaths, had an incredible ability to read people. I could see through lies and discover hidden motifs. However, when Debra and Dexter spent time with her, Vogel's approach was completely in Dexter. She commented, "You have always been closer than most brothers," but never addressed the deepest implications. Was that supervision or strategy? Here is a theory. Vogel saw the feelings of Debra, but did not act because they did not fit in their narration. For Vogel, Dexter was the central figure, a living example of his success. Debra's emotions were just another piece in the Dexter puzzle. Vogel may have ruled out his attachment as unimportant or even useless. But what would happen if Vogel's silence was deliberate? She was a master manipulator. By letting the feelings of Debra slowly, I was testing how far Debra would come to protect Dexter. Every time Vogel praised Dexter's link with Debra, he reinforced his devotion without knowing it, pushing it deeper into emotional agitation. Vogel believed that Dexter's ability for love made him unique among psychopaths. She saw her link with Debra as proof that she was not completely broken. But what if she misunderstands? What would happen if Debra's closeness was not a sign of Dexter's humanity, but a reflection of the romantic feelings of Debra? Could Vogel's bad reading have fed the tragedy? Vogel was not just an observer, he was a catalyst. His Dexter approach blinded her at Debra's cost. By prioritizing Dexter's development, Vogel may have left Debra to fight with the emotions that he could not completely understand. So, did Vogel's silence protect Dexter or destroy Debra? If I saw the truth, did you ignore the brilliance or its greatest failure? Now, let's go back to Frank Lundy. He saw everything: courtyards, reasons, truths that others lost. But did he also see the true one that Debra struggled with more? His love forbidden by Dexter? If so, why didn't you act? Lundy was not just a researcher, he was the researcher. His ability to connect the points made him stand out. When it came to Debra, he saw it as more vulnerable. She trusted him in a way she didn't trust others. But did that confidence reveal his hidden feelings? Consider the signs. Dexter's loyalty went beyond the devotion between brothers. She defended it, justified her actions, and put it before her well-being. Someone like Lundy would have noticed. His tone, his body language, even the weight he carried when Dexter was in trouble, he would have highlighted everything. Then, there is his tendency to minimize Dexter's defects. Lundy could have seen this as more than bias. He could point out deeper feelings. But here's the question: did you confront it? Lundy was not impulsive. I would not act without evidence. Instead, he could have subtly probed, testing his reactions with carefully chosen questions. For example, he always asked why he couldn't separate from Dexter, even when he hurt her. Did your answer confirm your suspicions, or at least make you wonder? Now, here is the real dilemma. Lundy was a man of principles. If I had discovered the feelings of Debra, would you face your help or pain? What would that have meant for your relationship? Here is a theory. Lundy knew more about what he left. If he felt that part of Debra's heart was still with Dexter, he may have moved unconsciously. Not by trial, but understanding his connection could never compete completely with the link he shared with his brother. And then, what would happen? The death of Lundy shortened his relationship. If I had lived, would you have faced Debra or continued loving her despite Dexter's shadow? If Lundy suspected, he adds a tragic layer to his history. He deeply worried about the people in his life, bringing his secret, even without confirmation. Then there is Tom Matthews. Matthews always seemed to know more than anyone in Miami Metro. But did Debra know about his love for Dexter? And if so, why didn't you act? Matthews was not just a high-ranking officer. He was the closest confidant of Harry Morgan, a master of the reading people. For years, he had a front row for the dynamics of the Morgan family. He saw Harry focus on Dexter, while Debra struggled to prove his worth. Matthews, trained to detect patterns, could not have missed the unwavering Debra devotion to his brother. Debra not only protected Dexter, but prioritized him above all, even at the expense of his career and relationships. Matthews would have noticed his softer tone when he talked about Dexter, the emotional weight he carried when he was in trouble. For someone like Matthews, this was not only the loyalty of the brothers, but something deeper. But this is where it gets interesting. Matthews was not driven by empathy. It was a pragmatic that prospered with control. If I suspected the feelings of Debra, I could have seen them as a tool, not as a problem. He would not have exposed this knowledge unless he gave him an advantage. Imagine Matthews dropping subtle suggestions to Debra, just enough to remind him that he was always looking. Matthews' silence raises another question. If I knew, why didn't they confront it? Did you see the feelings of Debra as manageable? Or did it remain silent to protect family dynamics? Matthews could have chosen silence to avoid destabilizing the balance that served his interests. There is also the possibility that Matthews has used this knowledge to protect himself. As Harry's confidant, Matthews was deeply linked to Dexter's secret. Exposing Debra's feelings could have attracted unwanted attention to Dexter's darkness. Matthews would have had all the reasons to stay silent, putting his position first. But here is the darkest side. Was Matthews complicit in Debra unraveling? Her feelings not addressed by Dexter led her to moral commitments and emotional agitation. If Matthews had faced her or Harry, could he have changed his way? Or was your silence a calculated movement to protect your connection with Harry's legacy? Now, let's move on to Harry Morgan. Harry built his life in discovering hidden truths, but did you see the secret closest home? Debra's feelings for Dexter? And if he did, why didn't he act? Harry was not just Dexter and Debra's father. He was his protector, his guide, the architect of the Dexter Code. As a detective, Harry was acute, but his focus on Dexter blinded him to Debra's emotions. Harry spent years shaping Dexter to fit with society, leaving Debra to find his place as the second child. This created a link between her and Dexter, one that bordered the lines between loyalty between brothers and something else. Harry must have noticed the dynamics. Debra idolized Dexter as a child, and as they grew up, his admiration became an unwavering devotion. Harry, perceptive as he was, would have seen these patterns. But why didn't you act on that? Maybe because his approach was always in controlling Dexter's darkness. Debra's feelings could have seemed manageable or even useful. After all, its loyalty provided another layer for Dexter's secret. Why risk destabilizing that? There is another possibility: guilt. When focusing on Dexter, Harry pushed Debra to a role he shouldn't have had. She became not only her sister, but her emotional anchor. Addressing their feelings would have meant confronting their failures as a father, a truth that Harry was not ready to face. But what would happen if Harry's silence was not about guilt? What would happen if I thought Debra's feelings could help Dexter? His love, no matter how complicated, higher protectors. Maybe Harry saw him as a necessary commitment to keep Dexter safe. The tragedy of Harry's role is how much he saw, but how little he acted. When focusing on Dexter, he left Debra to navigate alone for his feelings. If he had addressed them, could he have helped her clarity? Or would he have destroyed the balance that she worked so hard to maintain? What do you think? Did Harry know about Debra's feelings? Was your silence an act of love or the greatest failure of a father who thought he could control everything? Debra itself. Finally, we arrived at the only person who knew his feelings better than anyone. Debra herself, his confession to Dr. Ross was not the beginning. It was the end of a long and painful trip. Think about your relationships. Quinn, Lundy, and others. None of them worked, not for men, but by Dexter. Each relationship became a comparison with him, even if Debra never realized it. Here is a theory. Debra not only loved Dexter romantically, he loved his idea. The only person who could protect her, understand her, and never leave. Dexter was his constant, but when he saw the real Dexter, he who had a dark passenger, shattered it. Who truly understood Debra's love for Dexter? Or his fall? His love was not just romantic, it was a survival mechanism, anchoring him in a world full of chaos. However, he took her to decisions that finally broke her. Who understood Dexter's love? Dr. Michelle Ross heard him directly from her, forcing Debra to confront feelings that he could not admit. Dexter seemed alien, or maybe he chose not to see him. Vogel probably felt the tension, but his focus on Dexter blinded her to Debra's pain. Lundy could have seen the signs but chose silence. And Harry, despite shaping their lives, remained silent, driven by guilt and its Dexter focus. But here is the true tragedy. Despite all these people, nobody understood Debra, even to herself. His love for Dexter was more than romantic. It was a desperate need for connection, based on trauma and fear of abandonment. He caught her in a cycle of sacrifice and self-destruction. Debra's story is not just about prohibited love. It is the need for connection, the pain of tacit truths, and the devastating cost of loyalty. So what do you think? Was Debra's love for Dexter her greatest strength or her downfall? Let us know in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.